On the 26th, a relief column from the US Third Corps relieved Bastogne. Von Rundstedt had already wanted to call the offensive off, but Hitler refused, and by the 28th, the German momentum was spent. Tanks were running out of fuel and being abandoned. The wooded countryside of the Ardennes, with its opportunity for using cover, making it easy to stalk tanks, which is what many American tanks and tank destroyers did, was not the best environment for the Panther, which could not use its long-range gun to best effect. As the Bulge contracted eastward, under US and British pressure, the surviving Panthers carried out a fighting retreat. Although the Panther was undoubtedly the best medium tank in the battle, it was never available in sufficient numbers to cancel out the more numerous Allied armour. Even so, Allied losses amounted to a few thousand tanks and other vehicles, roughly 10% of the effective Allied strength in Europe at this time. In early January, with improving weather, the Allied fighter bombers were out in force and Panzer losses increased. By the time the offensive was closed down, nearly 200 Panthers had been written off to all causes. Total German losses in the Battle of the Bulge amounted to about 600 tanks. This late model Panther G, identifiable by its chin gun mantlet and raised engine fans on the rear deck, was knocked out by US forces at Hotten in Belgium on the 26th of December 1944. Unlike the previous Panther, which wore the ornate ambush camouflage scheme, the crew of this late Panther G made at least some attempt to whitewash their vehicle for the snowy conditions of the Ardennes. The blackened turret suggests that this Panther suffered a severe internal fire. This late Panther G was knocked out from the rear by a US Army tank destroyer, the subsequent internal fire being sufficiently fierce to weaken the torsion bars with the result that the suspension has collapsed. The fire has left the rest of the Panther a blackened hulk. The Allied advance into Germany from March 1945 was rarely opposed by any significant German forces. With the encirclement of the 5th Panzer Army, 5th Army and the remaining 19 divisions of Field Marshal Model's Army Group B in the Ruhr pocket, very few Panzers were now available to offer concerted resistance. However, small, ad hoc battle groups were encountered by the Allies. Equipped with 1 or 2 Panthers, a surviving Tiger, or a self-propelled gun and crewed by die-hard soldiers, these would offer fierce, local resistance until their fuel and ammunition ran out or they were destroyed. Other abandoned equipment littered the routes of advance, such as this Panther G being examined by a group of US soldiers. The crew had clearly made an attempt to deck out their tank with camouflage to give it some protection from the Allied fighter bombers that rove ahead of the advancing Allied columns, flying at low level and shooting up anything deemed to be a threat. Here a late model Jagdpanther, based on the Panther G chassis, has been knocked out by a US Army M36 tank destroyer. The M36, mounting a 90mm gun, was one of the few Allied vehicles that could penetrate both the frontal armour of the Panther and Jagdpanther. One of the very rare Panther variants encountered by the advancing Allies was a late model Panther G using the steel road wheels derived from the Tiger II. The fire in this Panther has evidently collapsed the torsion bars, leading to the pronounced droop at the rear of the tank. It was shortly before Goebbels closed down the cinemas in Germany and brought to an end the filming for the weekly newsreels in March 1945 that this footage of Panthers in action around Breslau was taken. All are late Model Gs and are painted in an unusual camouflage scheme. Supported by grenadiers and half-tracks mounting triple 30mm cannon, the Panthers advanced to engage oncoming Soviet armour. One Soviet tank, probably a T-34-85, has been engaged and destroyed at fairly close range. The final Soviet offensive to capture Berlin opened before dawn on April 16, 1945, with a massive artillery barrage of 8,000 guns and rocket launchers. These were directed at the German positions on the Zeylau Heights by the forces under the command of Marshal Georgy Zhukov. Further to the south, his great rival, Marshal Ivan Konev, launched his own offensive by 1st Ukrainian Front some 75 minutes later. For 3 days, the Germans skillfully held off Zhukov's forces. The 88mm guns and panzer units of Panthers and King Tigers destroyed large numbers of Soviet tanks, the western banks of the Oder becoming a mass graveyard of shattered Russian armour. Zhukov, stung by comments from Stalin about the delay in his offensive timetable, lambasted his senior commanders and demanded a breakthrough at any cost. By the afternoon of the 19th, the heights had been stormed and the German forces overrun. The advance on Berlin now began in earnest. Overhead, the Red Air Force pounced on the retreating German columns, streaming back towards Berlin. By the 25th of April, the city was completely encircled. A small number of Panthers and other Panzers lay within the city to contest the Soviet advance, as the Russians moved in medium and heavy armour in the shape of T-34s, JS-2s and supporting ISU 122 and 152 heavy assault guns. By the 30th, the Soviet 150th Division had fought its way to the Reichstag, which was defended to the last by fanatical troops from the SS, assisted by Volkssturm and Hitler Youth. At 22:50 hours, a small party of Soviet troops scaled the stairs to the roof of the Reichstag building and unfurled the flag in symbolic triumph for the USSR's victory over Nazi Germany. Hitler was dead, and on the 2nd of May the Germans in the city surrendered. Berlin had fallen.